Welcome to this video tutorial involving probabilities coming from tables and conditional probability as well. We are going to work through the 8 items pictured on our screen. Now notice the first thing that we're going to find is the probability that an individual in this apparent survey is a fan of the Indians. So what we really care about is figuring out how many total people prefer the Indians and how many people overall were surveyed. So 25 plus 15 is 40. That's how many people preferred the Indians. And while we're at it, why don't we get these other numbers as well? 75 people prefer the Cavs, 65 people prefer the Browns. And this way, how many men were surveyed? 35 and 15 is 50, plus 30 is 80. 70 and 30 is 100. Women surveyed. So overall, in this table, we have 180 people surveyed. That would be the men plus the women. Or down here, 140 plus 40 is also 180. So it's nice to double check and make sure we've got all those numbers calculated properly. For the probability of being an Indians fan, there were 40 total Indians fans, 180 people surveyed. Now in a tabular format, generally speaking, the preference would be to have answers as 3 decimal places. So when we do 40 divided by 180, making it 3 decimal places, it would be 0.222. And that would be our final answer for the probability of being an Indians fan. Now let's move on. So the probability of being a Browns fan, given that we know the individual was a man, we're going to confine ourselves to the men. There are 80 total men in the survey. So this is going to be something out of 80 because we know that the respondent was a man. How many of the men preferred the Browns? Well, there were 35. So the probability that the individual is a Browns fan or prefers the Browns, given that they are a man, would be 0.4375. This is one where it's a terminating decimal. It stops, it doesn't repeat. So in that instance, please show the entirety of the decimal. Next, we want the probability that the individual is a woman, given that they are a Cavs fan. So we're just going to focus in on the Cavs fans. How many total Cavs fans are there, or people that prefer the Cavs among these 3 teams? That would be 75. How many of them are women? Well, that's 45. And again, we're going for the 3 decimal places correctly rounded, or if the decimal terminates, just write the terminating decimal. In this case, it's 0.6. So that would be an appropriate final answer unless the directions said otherwise. Continuing along, we want the probability that the individual is not a Browns fan or does not prefer the Browns, given that they are a man. So again, what we're going to look at is the men row of our table. There are 80 total men being surveyed. And how many of them are not Browns fans? Well, that would be the Cavs and the Indians put together. 30 plus 15 is 45. So there would be 45 men who are not Browns fans out of an 80 total number of men responding in the survey. So when we do that, it comes out to be 0.5625. Again, the decimal terminates, so we will show the entirety of the decimal places. Continuing, the next item is what's the probability that the respondent is a woman and prefers the Browns? Woman and prefers the Browns is just this entry in the table. It's 30. How many total respondents? Because we're not limiting ourselves. We're not given that this individual is anything in particular. There are 180 total respondents. 30 divided by 180, rounded correctly to 3 decimal places, would be 0.167. So as long as we don't see that given bar, that straight line, the number we're dividing by is the total number of entries in the table. So now we want the probability that the individual is not a Cavs fan and a man. So there's a couple ways of thinking about this. Perhaps the way I'm going to illustrate might be the most simple. Cavs fan and a man is right here. We don't want that to be true. So we're looking at everything else in the table. So if we added up all those other numbers, what would we get? Well, the easiest way to look at that is take the total number of people in this survey, 180, and subtract away the 30 that we have. 180 minus 30 leaves us with 150 people who are not Cavs fans and men. And then how many total people again was 180. So the probability of being not a Cavs fan and a man would be 150 divided by 80, or divided by 180, excuse me. Rounded correctly to 3 decimal places, we get 0.833. Now, sure, there are other ways that you could approach that. For one, remember we said that when there's a bar on top of the whole thing, you take the individual bars and put the U in between. So if we said not a Cavs fan, that would be anything here that I just boxed in blue. And if we said not a man, that would be also including women. So everything that we included would be included regardless. Okay, so now we move on. We want the probability of being a Browns fan or a Cavs fan. So really what we care about are the numbers that I've just shaded in green. Easiest way to count them up is to do 65 plus 75. That would be the Browns fans and the Cavs fans. That gets 140. There isn't any given. We don't know what type of individual we're looking at. We're not specifying. So 180 total respondents. And when we take 140 divided by 180, we'll round it to 3 decimal places correctly, 0.778. And we've got one more item that we wish to calculate in this particular problem. We want the probability of not being a Indians fan or a Browns fan. So first of all, if I wanted to focus in on being an Indians fan or a Browns fan, that would be this and that would be this. We want everything else. We don't want that. We want everything else. Everything else in this problem would be right here, basically being a Cavs fan. So that would be 75 out of the full allotment of 180 respondees. 75 divided by 180, we'll round it correctly to 3 decimal places, 0.417. Now again, that's the one that we could look at slightly differently as well. When there's a bar on top of the whole thing, we could split it up and say this would be not an Indians fan and not a Browns fan. Well, not an Indians fan would be this stuff right here, and not a Browns fan would be this stuff right here. And where are they both true? In the region that would be the Cavs fan. So we could split this up in a variety of ways, but the most key issue is whatever way works best for you, approach it that way. The denominator is going to be our total number of respondees unless we have that given bar where we know we're limiting it to men, women, Cavs fans, Browns fans, Indians fans, whatever. And then write your answer as 3 decimal places correctly rounded, unless the decimal terminates, in which case show the entirety of the decimal. Keeping things organized like this, hopefully these probability problems stemming from tables really aren't that bad.